Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from The New York Times, and myself, Rob Harris from Sky News, guiding you through the week's sports news. And it turns out maybe inspiring some candidates for the International Olympic Committee elections.
Yeah, that's right. Japan's outsider candidate, 7-person field for this, Morinari Watanabe, who heads global gymnastics, he said he hopes to spark a debate with his crazy idea of a 5-continent 24-hour Olympics. Guys, his idea?
No, Rob's idea. So again, the other day you inspired DAZN to have lots of investment from Saudi Arabia. Tariq, now the whole Olympics is coming out to Rob's crazy idea.
Rob, tell us all about it. What is this crazy idea?
I had previously suggested spreading the Olympics across an entire day, spread across the world, different sports in different locations, giving a 24-hour TV experience. And what appears in this presidential manifesto, the games on 5 continents, saying that the games be broadcast and streamed 24 hours a day, which will unite the world. We've heard that phrase from someone else, haven't we, in sport?
We have. I'm sure we'll hear it again. Maybe later in the pod.
That's a teaser. Suggesting 10 sports per host city, 50 sports in total. So a way of getting a lot more sports. There's now, around 25 sports, aren't there, in the Olympics? This should be doubling it.
Well, unfortunately for you, Rob, I don't think he's got a chance of winning, actually. And it certainly hasn't been adopted by the 2 favourites at the moment, Sebastian Coe and Juan Antonio Samaranch Jr. So you may have to wait for your place in the glorious Olympic sunshine.
Some of the detail, actually, you know what? It's not far-fetched at all. We live in a world which is hyper-connected. TVs are on all day, and some sports, as we've said, Rob, as we've said in the past, are more popular in certain places than the other. And there's also climate change. I mean, one of the points Watanabe made, actually, he said, when it's summer in the northern hemisphere, it's winter in the southern hemisphere. So you could have the marathon and some of the athletic events where it's cooler. And there's been so many issues with the marathon in recent years.
Yeah, there's quite a focus on reducing economic costs and in being environmentally more sustainable as well. And some countries could never get a chance of hosting an entire Olympics. But if you could put the marathon in a certain place where it's really popular as well, you bring out the crowds and you would get the benefit of that city, that country really getting behind its moment in the Olympic spotlight. Even just having 1 or 2 sports would allow it to be an Olympic host city. Talk about how it is meant to inspire more people to take up sport when it goes around the world, the Olympics. Well, yeah, it could have a far larger footprint of interest. Plus, obviously, those host cities that do encounter challenges locally in democracies about providing the funding for such a games. And, also I've been interviewing Johan Elias, one of the other candidates as well, and he's talked about, for the Winter Games, having a selection of 10 hosts that you guarantee over the next 40 years will split the Winter Olympics. And that's with more of an eye on the impact of climate change, reducing the number of potential venues that can even stage a Winter Olympics, unless you build artificial winter facilities.
No, I mean, it just shows how kind of complicated some of this stuff has. Also in the news this week, of course, like something as simple as getting the medals right. The IOC has had to acknowledge that, more than 100 athletes have asked for their Olympic medals from Paris to be replaced, particularly the bronze medals designed by luxury maker LVMH there with such great fanfare. They're scuffed and crumbling. And I'm talking to other NOCs, National Olympic Committees, it's not only the bronze, some silver and gold as well. I mean, the Olympics are so complicated that, even getting the medals right seems a hard task these days.
Yeah, that's all down to, allegedly anyway, depending who you believe, European Union regulations about the types of metal alloys you're allowed to add into the medals or not. But yeah, it's a bit embarrassing. Well, I don't think any medals produced by FIFA for the Club World Cup in the USA this summer have any problems around what sort of alloys they're allowed to use.
They've got Tiffany on board, haven't they?
Yep, another LVMH company there. Tiffany also
LVMH unites the sports world, it turns out.
It really does, because they also make the Vince Lombardi trophy for the Super Bowl, other big US sports, NBA, etc. So football united through luxury.
Inauguration week for the 47th President of the United States, and I think this was the moment when a lot of the world suddenly latched on to, why is Donald Trump so close to one particular sports leader? Because this was the week of Mr. Infantino goes to Washington and Davos as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's understandable that the FIFA president would go to the inauguration of the next US president. The Men's World Cup is there 2026. The new Club World Cup is there this summer. But, I mean, the social media activity from Gianni Infantino has just been astounding. There have been 9 separate Instagram posts by him about Trump. And he even used a phrase, "We are going to make America great again." You know, his Donald Trump's campaign phrase, and Gianni Infantino is repeating it. It's just, I think it's astonishing.
And he was sitting there right behind Donald Trump at the inauguration during his speech. We can get on to some of the things he had to perhaps maybe awkwardly sit through, not necessarily applauding all the time as that speech was made. But, you know, yes, some sports hosting events in a country might absolutely relish such a close relationship with the national leader as they seek to get things done. And definitely the word inside FIFA is this close Infantino-Trump alliance is a shortcut to getting things done. You know, you've got the entree right into the White House to be able to resolve anything when you're staging such a huge event, the first 48-team World Cup. So you could see this as a clever move by Infantino.
Well, no, at practical level, there are reasons to have a good relationship. So we're talking about immigration and visas, security, putting a World Cup together. But it's more the tone and the optics of it, right? You can have a close relationship. But what we've seen over the last week is a certain sort of teenage giddiness with Infantino related to Donald Trump, that proximity, those Instagram posts. I mean, this is the world football leader. He's not a political leader. He hasn't posted. He might, a football tournament, a World Cup, you'll get like posts of at this volume and frequency from Gianni Infantino. But he's there, and he's talking about himself as much as FIFA. We've seen, he's mentioned me, he's talked about me, he's acknowledged me and FIFA, which is kind of a weird thing, I think. When you're like in high school and there might be, someone you want to show off in front of. And so, oh, no, look, he's talked about me. There is a bit of that. And I've talked to people in FIFA as well. And yes, there is, as you said, there is a good idea that we've got a good relationship. But there's also, I think, a fair degree of, a little bit uncomfortable here. This is a bit weird, but let's try and focus on the football here. They are a little bit, I don't know, maybe even embarrassed by some of this.
Well, decide for yourself. Let's take a listen. This was Donald Trump on Sunday night, a big rally in DC ahead of the inauguration. What Gianni Infantino posted on Instagram.
So the Olympics is great, and Gianni for the others, the World Cup, Gianni is the head of it. So I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So Gianni, thank you for the World Cup, and everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
What an incredible honor, what an incredible privilege. At the victory rally, President Donald J. Trump, in his speech, mentioned FIFA, mentioned myself, thanking us, looking forward to the events we are organizing here, of course, the World Cup mostly. Well, this is FIFA at the maximum of its respect, being mentioned by the new President of the United States of America in his victory rally, in his victory speech, is unique, is beautiful. I would like to thank President Trump, with whom I have a great friendship, and to assure him that together we will make not only America great again, but also the entire world, of course, because football or soccer unites the world. Bye.
Something very noticeable. When Gianni Infantino's Instagram reposted the Trump speech, they removed the president's references to the rigged election in 2020.
That's interesting. Yes, because obviously Trump claims that the Democrats rigged the election against him, that he lost. So yes, that obviously a little bit too political for FIFA.
He is, though, seeing the benefits of as he calls it, the rigged election, which is a false claim, because it means he is in office now for the Olympics and the World Cup.
Yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it? This opportunity. At least he's not, someone who's going to a grandstand on the biggest stages. You've got a month with the world watching you at the FIFA World Cup there in 2026 with Canada and Mexico, which we probably want to think about when he's talking about Mexico in the ways he has done. And then, of course, the Los Angeles Olympics there in 2028.
And just some of those things that Infantino had to sit through behind him, right in vision, so you could see if he did get up and applaud. And I think there was a bit of awkwardness across his face, not knowing what to do, because some of those key messages from Trump in his inauguration speech, drill, drill, drill in terms of oil. Well, FIFA does have this huge commitment and belief to net zero and climate change, doesn't it? And combating climate change, which is at direct odds with the Trump agenda. Then you've got Trump talking about there being only two genders. He signed that executive order saying there's only male and female. Well, we had a non-binary player, Quinn from Canada, at the last Women's World Cup. There was the undoing of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. FIFA keep talking about zero tolerance against discrimination, really portraying themselves as activists in that. And then Trump withdrawing the United States and the World Health Organization, whereas you have Infantino signing these partnerships and agreements with the WHO. So quite a few contradictions there.
Yeah. Also, he did look like he was laughing. I wasn't sure if he was laughing nervously when Trump said we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. But it definitely was an awkward moment. And yeah, the thing about the only two genders, I mean, actually, in terms of Trump's new law, it wouldn't affect Quinn, because Quinn was born female and took part in the Women's World Cup. FIFA doesn't have the sort of block on transgender women, i.e. people who were born male but then transitioned to become women, playing in women's football. Lots of other international federations do have that now, for example, athletics. But FIFA is actually behind the curve in terms of other sports. So you're right, that is a difficult one for FIFA.
Does this lead us then to conclude that FIFA couldn't run any form of diversity or inclusion scheme with any federal institution around the World Cup?
Well, it's interesting what to see now in Miami and Florida, where FIFA are building those offices, where the World Cup is going to be organised from, the legal offices there as well, whether there's going to be any changes to how they operate their offices in the United States, in particular. But yeah, I don't know. What about FIFA's responsible for 211 nations? This kind of proximity to one leader in this way, very personal way. I just wonder how that plays globally. If you're an institution that has a role like FIFA, but you're kind of supposed to be above the fray, really, aren't you?
Could FIFA say the World Cup as its biggest revenue generator, it needs to be a success to be able to help fund those member associations around the world? And imagine the reverse, where the president of a country wanted nothing to do with FIFA much, and you're there grappling with various challenges to get logistical matters over the line, and you might be struggling to get approvals that you need for a World
you're
Cup.
describing that in a black and white scenario, right? You're saying, like, what if he had a horrible relationship with
Joe
Donald
Biden.
Trump? Yeah, but the Biden administration, they didn't want the FIFA World Cup to fail, did they? They're happy for the World Cup to be in the United States. The US is a complicated place, and having the federal relationship might help with certain things. But the way the United States works, state laws, local laws, they still exist whether Donald Trump is in power or not as well. And of course, it will be helpful to have a good relationship. But what we're talking about here is the tone, the style, and the manner of all of this, and drawing this attention to himself. Is he embarrassing himself and FIFA, the institution, in some way? And that question, I think, is an open question.
Yeah, depends on your point of view. I mean, you're right when you mention visas. I mean, I think that is something which has been a big concern for FIFA in terms of what's going to happen for all the fans that are going to be visiting, particularly for the Men's World Cup in 2026. They hadn't really got anywhere with the Biden administration, who hadn't been nearly as welcoming for Infantino as Trump has been, that's for sure.
Well, he didn't meet him. Like all of those White House visits that Gianni Infantino got used to during Trump's first presidential term, the door was pretty much closed on him with the Biden administration. Now, we assume he's going to be back in the White House. He was already in Mar-a-Lago just before the inauguration meeting Donald Trump. So, yeah, we'll see that going forward.
And then there was this at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where Gianni Infantino was, and Donald Trump dialing in remotely.
We also have the World Cup, and I understand Gianni's in the room. Infantino, he was very instrumental in helping us get it. He's there with you someplace, I think, and I want to thank him for that. I'm going to be president during the World Cup and the Olympics and the 250th anniversary, so that's going to be 3 big events.
That was posted by Gianni Infantino on Instagram saying, "Thank you, President Trump, for once again showing your support for the 2026 FIFA World Cup." He went on to praise his leadership and how football will unite the world.
Because that's what Donald Trump's trying to do as well. He's trying to unite the world, of course. So these two men clearly in sync.
Could bring Russia back into the football fold, though, if he does manage to end the war, although he said he'd do it on day 1. It's not quite happened yet at the time of recording.
Day 10.
But we do have to recognise there is some appeal, particularly through sports stars, through sports fans for Donald Trump. I was speaking to Alexei Lalas, that former star of the 1994 World Cup, in the last week. He said he'd lost some friendships over being full on MAGA, but he believes in the common sense agenda. So many UFC fighters as well, and we've seen the Trump dance emulated at soccer, at NFL, even had managed to miss at the time at Barnsley in the English Football League back in November as well, the dance to the YMCA. So it's not quite as culturally taboo, is it, anymore, associating with Trump and his actions.
No, because we live in a world of slogans as well. Did he explain what the common sense agenda is?
He did. I think he does see some support for things like banning transgender women from women's sport, and certainly that is rhetoric that chimes with quite a few people. I spoke to a female cyclist saying that she was a registered Democrat, but certainly without revealing her vote, Trump, talking about the ban on transgender women from women's sport, was swaying how she thought as she approached election day in November, which is quite surprising for some. That might be top of their agenda in terms of entering the voting booth rather than things like the state of the economy.
Yeah, so for Alexei Lalas, top of mind was the role of issue of transgender women in sport when it came to voting. That is interesting, I guess.
Yeah, and I think just generally a belief about this, how we can make the country better.
Right again.
Well, I think the one that we take away from this, certainly we've been reporting on it throughout the week, is Trump will very much be making sport centre stage during his presidency. It's not some sort of sideshow. He's going to seize every opportunity, harnessing the power of those major events. The Olympic, the opening ceremony in 2028, biggest sporting pulpit possible at the opening ceremony, and we'll wait to discover, and it will come up next week, because all the 7 IOC presidential candidates are appearing together. Just give us an indication who might be the winner.
Yeah, it's touch and go, I think. It's I think it's going to be, I think we said before, it's going to be very, very open. It does look to me like a sort of bit of a fight between Cohen and Samaranch. Kirsty Coventry, I think many people thought she was Thomas Bach's chosen choice. I think she's probably drifted out somewhat.
Well, listen, from my point of view, and because of his fidelity to the pod, I'm just, gunning for Mr. Morinari Watanabe of Japan, maybe an outside chance. But these are some great ideas, Mr. Watanabe.
And he's very much welcome on the podcast. Well, we do have another guest now joining us, because it's time to focus on the money of football. And joining us now from Deloitte is Jenny Haskel. She's a knowledge and insight lead in the Deloitte Sport Business Group, one of the key figures behind the Deloitte Football Money League, one of the highlights of the season for some in the game. Particularly if you look at Aston Villa, they posted very proudly about making it onto number 18 on the chart, having made it to the Champions League. Jenny, welcome to Sport Unlocked.
Thanks so much for having me.
One of the headlines was Real Madrid crossing the $1 billion mark in terms of revenue. But is that the biggest headline for you, or are there some other insights that you think that tell us more about the state of the game?
They actually doubled their match day income over the past season, and that is due to the new Bernabeu Stadium and what they were able to capitalize on from everything from pre-seat licenses to non-match day events, and really using that stadium and the infrastructure that they have to generate higher commercial return as well. So one of the things that we saw is that top 10 in the Deloitte Football Money League could really see that commercial revenue growth, where they can utilize their brand for sponsorships, where they can really start to converge with media, sport, and entertainment.
I mean, it was interesting that Arsenal got one of the highest match days revenues in Europe, and I think the highest in the Premier League, but actually relatively small commercial income, yet went sort of jumped back over Liverpool and Chelsea and Tottenham just by the fact that they qualified for the Champions League last season. So it does actually show that particular sporting performance is still really key, isn't it? If you don't get into the Champions League, that's a big income drop.
Yeah, I think those European nights are definitely one to consider, and that sporting performance does matter a lot when it comes to that broadcast revenue. What we saw is that in the top 10 clubs, they were generally the same year on year, maybe a little bit of reordering based on sporting performance. But because of the large brands and the commercial appeal that they have, they were able to diversify their revenue to continue to stay in that top 10. Whereas that 11 to 20 ranking was a bit more prone to movement when it comes to sporting performance. So you saw a few clubs that popped into the top 20 ranking because they were featured in European competition as opposed to the previous year. So that was something that we really saw a difference in between that top 10 and 11 to 20 range.
Manchester United wrote to their supporters this week, I think, just to tell them because of the PSR, they need to sort of hit the balanced cost control rules. There might be a bit of pain with ticket prices coming up. Are we going to see a hike in ticket prices? Real Madrid, for example, you mentioned this new stadium. Are the tickets quite expensive there? Because I wouldn't have thought, Spain as a market of high ticket prices in general. But Real Madrid, you've said there with that new stadium, they've got huge ticket revenue there. How have they managed to do that? Is this all the VIP seats, hospitality seats, or is this increasing ticket pricing normally?
I think there's one thing that is really important to consider is that balance, right? Where these clubs need to continue to generate revenue so that they can be financially sustainable, but also that they can be competitive on pitch. But one thing that we know is that fans are at the heart and should be at the heart of all decisions, and that they are such a key stakeholder in these clubs. So when it comes to ticket prices at Real Madrid, for example, one of the things that they are able to use around their stadium are more premium offerings. I think that balance is really important between financial sustainability and making sure that you can stay top competitive, but also making sure that fans are recognized and that those decisions are made with fans at the heart of it.
One of the things that feed into the discussions at Manchester United, which in the last week has said, well, it's got two options. Does it build a new stadium, which would take capacity over 100,000 potentially, or stick with renovating the existing Old Trafford, which would be a maximum 80,000 capacity?
I think now in the Money League this year, half of the teams are either looking into renovation or looking into a new build in 2025 or in the upcoming years. So it's definitely a consideration. And we saw clubs like Liverpool or Olympique Lyon increase their matchday revenue by increasing the capacity at their stadiums. So I think it's definitely something that's top of mind, but also not just increasing capacity, but also how you utilize your stadium to help you diversify your revenue.
The match day revenue for Arsenal women, because they played quite a few games at the Emirates Stadium, looked like it sort of propelled them up to joint top place with Barcelona. Do you think that is the factor which has started the point?
I think one of the great things about the women's game is that the business models can be different a bit club to club. So Arsenal has done an incredible job at innovating the matchday experience for women's football at Emirates Stadium. And so that growth in matchday and seeing them break the attendance records for women's football in the country 3 times over in the last year is really exciting, but also allows them to capture new fans. And we talk about, if you're starting with that matchday, as you capture new fans at matchday, it kind of circles around and connects to that commercial appeal as well.
This is happening at the time Chelsea have just broken the women's transfer record same week as these numbers are coming out. Naomi Girma signed from San Diego, Wave, American defender. That's crossing a $1 million threshold. there. We talked about the billion with Real Madrid earlier, but it's quite a significant moment. And this transfer record seems to be broken increasingly. But the economics, you said there's just different models for women's football, different teams. Is there one that is going to be the model? Because when we look at men's football, obviously more established, there is a model. Is women's football heading to a certain direction? And how will the numbers add up in the end?
One of the things about using the main club stadia, right, is you can increase that capacity, and that match day revenue can increase quite a bit. But if there are scheduling concerns, or if there are other avenues in which these clubs can work with commercial sponsors to attract fans, it really depends on what the fan base is. I think what we're trying to figure out in women's football right now is we don't necessarily need to follow the men's template, but what actually works and what actually is unique to women's football that will help accelerate the game.
Do you see the growth of the women's game isn't just saying, well, stop going to a men's game, but to bring fans in from other entertainment industries or other sports?
It's really figuring out, are fans of the women's game also fans of the men's game? Are fans of the women's game fans of women's rugby or women's cricket and just want to be part of women's sport? Or were they brought in by the Lionesses or a national team event? And so once you start to figure out those types of entry points, because we know that for the most part, female fans have a different entryway to sport, that will be able to help figure out some of the ways in which we can continue to grow the league and the domestic teams. If a lot of the attention is coming from the national team, how do we bring those national team fans into the domestic league to continue growing it?
But at the moment, slightly, I guess, maybe critically, the audience for women's football is men watching on television. And I think that piece is not that clear, because it's great. This sport is growing and more people are watching, but the bulk of people watching football are men who are already watching football. So I guess they're just watching TV and there's more football on, so I'll just keep watching. That's not the growth area, though, surely, right, for women's football?
I think it's a myth that only women watch women's sport. Men enjoy women's sport as well. I think one of the things in terms of wanting to watch more sport, right, is that visibility angle and making sure that women's sport is available to capture what we call the casual fan. So we don't just have those diehard fans that are always involved in women's sport or always involved in women's football, but that we can broaden the visibility of the game.
As we broaden this out and we look at the domination of English teams in particular in the Money League, there's often a consideration about the health of the game, particularly across Europe. Scotland has the huge Premier League south of the border, which dominates in terms of TV and revenue. And then in the women's game, we've got talk of whether Rangers and Celtic should join the WSL. Do we have to look at the women's game in a different perspective, and maybe it can't sustain as many professional leagues, say, across Europe, and there needs to be amalgamation?
And I think actually one of the really interesting data points that came out of the Money League this year on the women's side is that there were 2 clubs from Japan who fell just outside of the 15 clubs that we analyzed. And they were above at least 3 WSL clubs in terms of revenue. And that's pretty significant to show that we have a chance in the women's game to really support a global game and to make it a bit more global outside of the traditional dominant footballing countries.
The top earning women's football teams, say, top 3, and how do they compare to the ones underneath them?
So the top 2 this year were FC Barcelona and Arsenal, who were in and around 17.9 million euros. They were 1 and 2, seemed to be 17.9 both, but by rounding, Barcelona just edged out Arsenal. Both of them have a bit different business models. I think there is a little bit of a gulf right now, but I also think that isn't as significant as it might be in men's football, for example.
Jenny, thanks so much for all your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Jenny Haskel there from the Deloitte Sport Business Group, and we're continuing the reference to Manchester City that was brought up there because we're waiting the outcome of the big 130 charges case brought by the Premier League, but there is another smaller, though significant case. It's the associated party transactions challenge brought by City against the Premier League. We thought this was all done and dusted with the verdict last year, but Martyn, still more to come on it.
Yeah, the panel of the 3 retired judges is sitting again next week, 2-day hearing, to basically decide on the status of the Premier League's associated party transaction rules as a result of Manchester City having a sort of partial victory, I suppose. Some of the rules they were declared unlawful. The Premier League voted in some amendments to change the rules as a result. Manchester City are claiming actually all the rules should be regarded as void. These rules cover sponsorship deals and player transfers from related companies and related clubs, and they basically say that they must be of fair market value. Now, if they don't have to be of fair market value, the fear is by the Manchester City's rivals that could open the door to absolutely enormous sponsorship deals from related companies. For example, Manchester City had a big new sponsorship deal with Etihad Airways knocked back by the Premier League. And if those limits are removed, is this an existential threat to the competitiveness of the Premier League?
The seismic victory, if I remember, the headline was when that APT case verdict was first announced in favour of Man City, and so we'll see if it was seismic in as you say in the next few weeks. I guess we're still waiting for the costs related to that case as well. So yes, a lot still to be revealed from that particular case.
Still no comment though from Manchester City on another development this week. Out of Spain, accusing them of wrongdoing.
Yeah, Manchester City have been the busiest team in the January transfer window. The results have gone south in an alarming way after November in ways we've not seen, and we've seen Man City act. And this case relates to an 18-year-old centre-back from Real Valladolid in Spain, a young Sierra Leonean player who is called Juma Ba. The club say he was on the cusp of signing a senior contract, which would have led to a more significant buyout clause, but they allege that City and agents related to them and him guided him to not sign this contract, to stay on youth terms. That meant that City could sign him for a very, very much cheaper price, millions cheaper than they would have. And so Valladolid are not happy. What happens here is very unclear, though, because Bar has paid in Spain. You pay your break clause. You go to the federation with a bag of cash or a check or whatever, and you buy yourself out of a contract, and that's what's been done.
And then he didn't go to training, and at the same time, then the club put out a statement talking about their great disappointment and indignation about the actions of City and the player's agent.
Yeah, I'm sure they are very indignant. I struggle to see how rules have been breached, actually. I think there may just be unhappiness. Even, however it's happened, I think, to me, it looks like it's within the rules as they are, but perhaps a little bit underhand.
I think the question is if there's been an inducement while a player is under contract, but it's very hard to prove that type of thing. The other thing with City, which is really interesting, is we've got the big case. Rob mentioned the 130 charges case, and whatever those outcomes are. One thing Man City have done in this January, they're never really busy in January in this way, but they've bought, if this deal goes through, 3 very, very young central defenders, for example. All of these guys, I think, under 20 years old. You've got Abubakar Kuzanov from Lens and Vitor Reis from Palmeiras. And that's led to speculation that one of the potential penalties City will face, if they are found guilty, are transfer window bans potentially. So you have got to use these windows when you can, perhaps to stock up. And that brings us to this other question of this enormous contract that Erling Haaland signed, a contract that I've never heard of in length for a player who's under contract. 9.5 years for a player who'd be, arguably in the top 3, top 4, top 2 most wanted players in the world, signing for 9.5 years with Manchester City.
I think this week marks 4 years on this pod.
Yes. No, I think there's a couple of things for that. I mean, I think one must be a sort of public relations exercise. Everything is okay here. Whatever happens with the 115, 130 charges, we are keeping our players. We remain confident about us in the future is the message to their supporters, I guess. I mean, it also crossed my mind. I mean, there is this FIFA group task force looking at transfer rules and this whole issue about whether there should be more ability for players, more freedom of movement for players. In the back of my mind, in the back of Manchester City's mind, are they thinking, well, actually, it makes sense now to tie players down to long contracts? Because if there are going to be changes to the transfer market, then perhaps we should do this now.
Oh, you mean if this is the Diarra case we talked about, so you can listen to previous pods for more information about that. But you mean he signed for 9.5 years. That means if he was to break, and the new mechanism will be how many years are left on your contract, that will be the size of the recompense. Correct. And that is an interesting theory. But from the player's point of view, the very best players want to sign, talking to agents, the shortest possible contracts, because every few years they could be available, as we saw with Mbappe here recently, on a Bosman, a free transfer, but they're not free. They know how much their own transfer fee would be worth in the open market. So there are hundreds of millions of euros at stake every few years for the very best players. So that is what made some agents think, why is he doing this? And then there must be clauses on both sides here. For Man City, Erling Haaland is a very big figure physically. He's 24 now. What will his body look like when he's 30? There's still 4 years to go on this enormous contract. It's just a really funky and funny and as creative as Haaland's agents have described deal.
How many forwards are still performing at the highest level at 34? Just look at down the line how many players might have a peak but then tail off. Neymar, go back even further. Michael Owen, yes, there's sort of Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, and Zlatan Ibrahimovic, but they are perhaps unique cases, great specimens in terms of how they maintain their body as well. Certainly, Haaland keeps himself in good shape, but there's some risk on City's side having a player tied up for that long on a reputed £500,000 a week. You could be struggling to offload him if there was a significant drop in performances, but we don't know what conversations have taken place behind the scenes. He left his previous 2 clubs as well by leaving before the end of those contracts as well. There was always a sense there was sort of implicit agreements about being able to step up gradually to the next challenge. They're obviously not going to announce publicly if there are break clauses and release clauses, and that was only anonymously briefed out.
No, but the anonymous briefing was the opposite, which I found really strange, to be honest. You're right.
That they removed them.
And the guy's history is that his career has been built on these clauses. He's moved previously with these smart clauses in place. He's had a big career plan. So, yeah, very, very interesting.
I mean, we've seen Manchester United struggling to offload players who've been tied down to big deals. Those many challenges confronting Sir Jim Ratcliffe a year into his control of football operations at Manchester United, although it's been sailing on his mind this week. He spent a lot trying to challenge for the America's Cup and it hasn't worked out. Suggestions he might be ready to walk away. Instead, he's split from Sir Ben Ainsley.
Yeah, I think this actually came as a big shock to Ben Ainsley. I think it's been known for some time he's had a strange relationship with Ratcliffe.
Great white splash.
Boom, boom. Very good. Well, actually, they reached the first final since 1964, and for Great Britain. But I think this is quite indicative of the sort of ruthlessness with which Ratcliffe runs his business, and which has been seen in the sort of cost cutting at Manchester United. And he's basically pulled the plug and split from Ainsley. And it does raise questions about. I mean, I think with Ruben Amorim, he's had such a terrible start for Manchester United, the manager. What will Ratcliffe's patience be like? But I think they probably have to give him a lot more time, surely.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of his operations, should he get rid of Amorim or that quickly, his popularity with the fans, we're talking about Ratcliffe and Ineos, seems to have nosedived very quickly after they arrived. Dave Brailsford and that Brains Trust that they've installed there, acting again at Man United and creating more chaos with another manager, surely. that will antagonize the fan base even more. With the team, where are they? Like at the time of recording, I think 14th in the Premier League. It's just really hard to fathom that, isn't it?
Come on, Tariq, don't underplay their performance. They're actually 13th.
Absolutely. It's a better weekend coming up for Manchester United fans, I guess, than I had thought. So congratulations on being one place higher, guys.
Well, we talked about contracts. I did mention that it was 4 years into the pod. And while you were talking, I did look up online. And yes, we're recording a couple of days out from the 4th anniversary pod. But where was it? I found this information quickest on IMDb. That's the Internet Movie Database. I don't know if they think we are a movie somehow, but it lists the top cast as all three of us.
We are on IMDb. That's great news.
I've always said your box office. So look.
Yeah, well, we certainly think they're listening to us in the Olympic world. And as we mentioned there, how we've been maybe inspiring some Olympic manifestos. You can always hit subscribe. We're landing your feeds automatically. There's a WhatsApp channel as well to get updates from, and the link is on the pod description. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.